I mentioned in my introduction, I'm Manfred Kohl. I'm in Nova Scotia, Canada, but I'm involved in that conference, global conference on integrity and anti-corruption. And as I mentioned, we have 5 interviews, and I have the privilege to lead the first interview with a person who is very exciting. Let me say that I am a theologian, I'm a pastor, I'm a professor in theology. I have visited many theological schools around the world, and integrity and anti-corruption is one of the most important topics. Unfortunately, it is not being taught in most of the schools. That has to change. But we are speaking about corruption and integrity in the whole world of psychology, mental development, healthcare. And right now, the whole world is governed by the health authorities. And there is so much corruption going on. But we are not speaking about the big issues, we're speaking about the personal issues. And so with me is a person who is part of our executive team for many years. I'd like to ask him to introduce himself. He's a man from Geneva in Switzerland, France. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kohl, Manfred, and I am just delighted to be interviewed by you, especially, and to be here. So my wife and I, we work as a team. We're both clinical psychologists. We've been working primarily in the Christian mission sector for 35 years, focusing on staff development, staff care, we call it member care. About 15 years ago, we included yet another important emphasis because of personal experience in our work, and that's the area of personal integrity, institutional integrity, indeed international integrity, and corruption because of what we had experienced. So we've been living for about 20 years in the Geneva area, and we engage regularly with colleagues and agencies in the United Nations, especially the World Health Organization and the United Nations Refugee Agency and other groups like that. And we work as psychologists, but there's also the important contribution, learning from each other in the area of integrity and anti-corruption. And just to give you a quick sense of how relevant and crucial this is in the United Nations system in which we connect, I just have a short quote from Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, from 2020, where he says, "Corruption is criminal, immoral, and the ultimate betrayal of public trust. We must hold leaders to account. A vibrant civic space and open access to information are essential. And we must protect the rights and recognize the courage of whistleblowers who expose wrongdoing. As an age-old plague takes on new forms, let us combat it with new heights of resolve." And I think for both the Christian church and the mission community, because of the endemic nature of corruption, we must find new ways to cooperate and to confront this age-old plague, even as the Secretary General of the United Nations has so eloquently stated it. So we work in Geneva, we work in the Christian mission sector, we work across sectors, humanitarian sector, development sector, peace and conflict sector, human rights sector, doing everything we can as followers of Christ to help righteousness and integrity reign and support staff and the hard work that they're doing. So that's a bit of our background.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As I mentioned in my introduction, we are 20 members of the executive team from different spheres of life. And you are the one, you and your wife, who are the closest to the United Nations. And we are very, very thankful that we have a voice in the United Nations. You think the United Nations makes an impact on the issue of fighting against corruption and also challenging people to integrity? So often we have wonderful statements, but how does it look in reality? You have attended many conferences. You have seen people discussing the issues. Are they really changing the situation?
Your question is so relevant, and my quick response is yes and no. Not to fault the United Nations, but just to talk about how difficult it is to corrupt the leaven, to use the biblical metaphor of leaven, which is in every sector, every organization, indeed, in the core of our own souls. So as we point the finger at the United Nations and seek clarity about how they are confronting corruption and promoting integrity, we must also look into our own souls, our own institutions, our communities, and so forth. But more to your specific question, the United Nations has set up a number of crucial mechanisms, starting with, I would say, the Convention Against Corruption in the early 2000s, to hold states, parties, that is nations, accountable for confronting corruption and being transparent and accountable at the national level and at the international level. And the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, based in Vienna, is doing a lot in this area. All you have to do is go on their website and you will see clearly how relevant their resources, their struggles, and their actions really are for this. Two statistics that really come to mind that are relevant for both the global community and for the church specifically, that have just weighed down heavily into my soul, is the World Economic Forum talks about $2.6 trillion every year lost to corruption. That's not talking about bribery, but just corruption in particular. And that the primary people that are being influenced by this 2.6 trillion of stolen resources and money are the poor, of which there's 1.3 billion people living in some type of multi-dimensional poverty. So when we look at the big picture, we see how massive it is, and the most vulnerable people are the ones who are suffering. So that's a quick snapshot of the global picture, but what about the church? We look at some of the statistics from the Center for the Study of Global Christianity, based in Massachusetts, and we see similar patterns for Christians. Every year, this year, for example, approximately $59 billion are stolen through ecclesiastical crime in churches and Christian ministries, and that is more than the total amount of international aid given to missions. International missions receive about 52 billion every year. 1 out of 3 churches, furthermore, experience some types of embezzlement, and the list can go on and on. So this global picture is affecting the body of Christ, and we've got to find better ways of dealing with it.
Thank you. When I hear these statistics, I get goosebumps. I get very nervous. I like to cry. And I'm glad that the United Nations and some other organization speak publicly and come up with some solution. But let's speak about a little bit about healthcare. And you are a psychologist. You're a person involved in that field. Could you give us a very simple explanation, a story, something that happened that you can point a finger and that all the listeners can say, oh, that can help me?
Yeah, thank you. I'll share 2 quick anecdotes. Again, going with the theme that corruption integrity starts in our own heart, and then it goes out to the interpersonal, institutional, international level. I remember as a boy being next to my father at a church service, maybe age 4, and the offering plate was coming around. I had 6 pennies, 1-cent coins, United States, in my pocket, and my father gave me a quarter worth 25 pennies. So when the plate came around, I very subtly put my 6 pennies in the offering plate and pocketed the quarter. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, really for me, my father saw that and he said, "Son, give me the quarter back. You just lost your pennies." I felt terribly stupid and ashamed, but it was a valuable lesson for me. And it goes back to, I think, the biblical notion, which is supported by social psychology, that the heart is more deceitful above all else and is desperately wicked and sick. Who can heal it? Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. So again, looking from an early developmental stage for all of us, some of the things we wrestle with, how we learn morality, how we put it in practice, or how we don't. The other really major area more recently that has affected us is when we began to see corruption among Christian leaders at the international level who we knew, who we trusted. And I will not name names, but there are websites that do name names. And I remember walking around the icy waters one winter day about 15 years ago of Lake Geneva with one of my closest friends and confidant. And for an hour, my dear friend just listened to me as I was just bearing my soul about my confusion and concern about this major fraud that was going on in the international Christian community. And I said, why are leaders, why is there so much hubris? Why is there a lack of accountability? Why do people hold themselves out to be righteous, but behind the scenes really cover up, steal money, and don't support victims who have lost money within their own organizations? And so after about an hour of moaning, my dear friend turned to me and said 2 words. He said, Kelly, read Machiavelli. Read Machiavelli. And if you haven't read Machiavelli, he's referring to the 16th century author of the book, The Prince, a short read, and especially chapter 15, which is less than 1 page, the essence of which is this, and it's so important for each of us. When push comes to shove, we will protect our own interest in the name of protecting the state and in the name of protecting people, trying to find a good reason, perhaps, for why we're doing what we're doing. We will manipulate both virtue and vice for our own means. The person who tries to just look consistently good, especially in a leadership position, will eventually fall because the world doesn't work that way. So you got to learn how to manipulate vice and virtue in order to stay in power. And indeed, this type of perspective is ingrained in the world system, but it's also ingrained in the church. And I think often when push comes to shove, as a psychologist, it's ingrained in our hearts. But here's the key thing. We rationalize, we justify, we distort what we're really doing so that we can sleep easily with our consciences at night. And that's one of the key takeaways from the field of psychology, call it cognitive dissonance, rationalization, self-justification, that plagues humanity from the individual to the interpersonal to the institutional at the international levels.
Thank you so much. I call you Dr. Kelly. And I also appreciate that you refer to several Bible passages. Is there one passage in the Bible that you can point to that really summarizes integrity and anti-corruption for us Christians?
This question, and the truth is that there are so many scriptures. You could almost open up any page of Christian scriptures and see relevance for integrity and corruption. 2 in particular that have very much influenced my wife and myself, giving us guidance and courage to continue to confront ourselves, confront others when necessary. The first is in the 8th chapter of Zechariah, which says, do not fear. Because whenever we, little editorial here, whenever we confront corruption in ourselves or others, it is scary and it is risky and there's almost always some kind of consequence or cost. So it starts out, do not fear. These are the things which you should do. Speak the truth to one another, judge with truth and judge for peace in your courts. Also, let none of you devise evil in your heart against other, and do not love perjury, for I hate all these things, declares Yahweh. And this is the final summary part. It says, therefore, love truth and love peace in your relationships. Truth and peace are so key. You can't have one without the other as we seek to live in integrity. And then the second scripture, which is really key, is from the translation, the Message in Luke chapter 6, I believe it's verse 26, where Christ says to his disciples, his disciplined followers, that is you and me, most of us listening to this broadcast here, where he says, sorry, it's just really, really important. It has a lot of meaning for me. It says, your task is to be true, not popular. Your task is to be true in your being, in your words, in your deeds, and not popular. Not a person pleaser, not a compromiser, but someone who is living in integrity, in truthfulness.
Thank you so much. That's right down to the center of what we want to convey. Before we close, I'd like to ask, you have started a special project that is now a global project. Just say a few sentences and tell us how people can join and participate in it.
Thank you. If any of the things that I've shared today in being interviewed with Manfred have been of interest to you, you can find perspectives and resources on the Global Integrity Day website. That's globalintegrity.org or globalintegrity.com. For the last 3 years, my wife and I have stewarded this International Day and this website, encouraging people from around the world to learn more about integrity, to live in integrity, and to rally around this special day, which every year is the 9th of June. It's exactly 6 months before or 6 months after the United Nations Global Anti-Corruption Day or International Anti-Corruption Day, which is the 9th of December. And there's some guidelines, some suggestions for how you might be involved, how you can contribute, and why this is relevant for you and your organization. But it is full of resources, and it's something which is very near and dear to our hearts, which we think can be supportive.
Thank you very much for that very helpful interview. And there will be further discussion when we meet in a week from now at the virtual cafe. And maybe by that time, we can also have the exact text and the Bible passages available for everyone. Thank you so much for the interview. God bless you.
Thank you, Manfred. God bless you also.